Today, we are going to tackle a topic that I feel is often taboo or feels a little cringy to have to listen or consider. That is being in-laws. So we are going to talk about today, specifically, we're going to make it a two-parter. Today, we're diving into the perspective coming from the we'll say daughter-in-law's perspective and the mother-in-law's perspective, and we're just gonna talk about what it feels like and how do you like build open communication and trust and stuff like that. So we just thought it would be a fun topic, and if you're somebody who feels like you're struggling to figure out how to have a healthier, easier, more peaceful or enjoyable dynamic, then hopefully you can get something from this, so stay tuned. I'm Erica, and I am your host of Power by Joy podcast, and here we're talking about ways to not struggle or how to get unstuck when you are bored, frustrated, you just feel like you can't make change in your life, don't feel like you're empowered to do so. We're looking at ways to make change and feel more joy, have more adventure and happiness in our lives. And so if that is something you're curious about, you're in the right place. So this is Kylie, and she was my first daughter because I had all boys. And I'm trying to think, how many years have you guys been together?
I think it's 14,
11.
Almost 14.
Yes.
In January will be 14 years together.
Yeah, so she started dating Jason right before I met Mitch, my husband.
Yeah.
So we're it's kind of like I can get them kind of close. Yeah. So obviously Kylie has been in my life for a long time, and I've been in hers since she was fairly young. And we just wanted to share because we've gone through our own journey and trying to figure out, like, you know, how do you talk and get through things, and like I think we both, you know, have realized how much you change as time goes on. So like when there's the dynamic that happens when they're just together as a couple, but there's no children involved. And then the next, you know, would be like when they're having kids. And then even when you have the first one, it's like a total shift in dynamics. But then as you pointed out, you know, as you add kids, like you as a person change, parenting more kids. And so we were talking about how even then, so realizing, I think a big takeaway is that we are realizing how fluid it is and how we continue to have to readjust and grow together, just like you would grow in a marriage or, you know, in any relationship, that it's just as important to kind of allow for that space.
Yeah, I would say at those big, like, life-changing points too are when things can get sticky and uncomfortable as we're shifting and growing if you're not communicating. Yeah,
I feel like that's when there's been times that's when
it's
miscommunication has become more, has been less easy, or there's been misunderstanding, or maybe there's just so much going on, you're not talking, and it's not out of any you know, it's not a specific reason, but they're just, life has been so busy that you aren't having that quiet one-on-one time, especially when kids enter the picture. It's harder to get that time with the adults to just communicate, right? So we were just wanting to share, because I think as a mom, sometimes it's hard to remember, and sometimes we think we remember, but we don't remember, or it's just different. Even as it was for us when we were raising kids, it was different than when our parents were raising kids, and it's different now for them. And so we thought it would be nice to kind of touch on having Kylie share, like, the perspective of what the dynamic is best, like what some of our frustration points are. Then that might help mothers out there, and then me sharing my perspective of coming from the mom's side, that might be helpful for the daughter-in-law. So we just want to kind of dive into that a little bit today. So when you reflect on you know, some of those first changes, and what do you feel were some of the harder points, or what were maybe some pain point or frustration points that I was doing, or you know, that were there that I wasn't aware, maybe that it wasn't always easy to just talk about?
Well, I definitely think it's easier before kids come into the picture for sure, because there's not other like parties and you're not responsible for anybody else but yourself. So it's just, I mean, life is a lot less busy, but you don't realize that until after the point. You know, hindsight's 2020 most of the time. I think, I mean, most of the times it feels like whenever like we do struggle with our relationship together, a lot of it's like either I feel like for myself I have expectations but maybe don't like communicate those expectations, and a lot of times that's when I'm like get disappointed with not just you but anybody if I have these expectations in my head but I've never like voiced the concern or like spoke them out loud or even knew what my own need was that I was trying to get met. And so that sometimes is when I think we've had trouble, or like not, I don't know, butting heads is the right word, but just like had hurt feelings from one another.
And we're really even acknowledging it. I think we both, we've had times where it has coincided where we're both feeling that
tension,
disconnect
probably.
or tension, and we think we're the only ones feeling that way necessarily. But then when we started talking, we're like, oh, you have hurt feelings, I have hurt feelings too. Oh, I guess it's time for a conversation. So that's definitely
really
been
true.
So when we also were talking about like when you, especially if you're earlier in the relationship, like, you know, they were together super young, and so there was still a lot of Jason talking to me about things and running things by me, or like seeking my counsel and things like that. And
I was too, because at the place that I was in my life, like my parents had just started their divorce when I started dating Jason. So my mom, you know, was kind of just on her own healing journey and not really available, and my dad was just unhealthy and I didn't want him around me. And so I was relying on you a lot too. So both of us were used to like utilizing you for that like adult feedback and that I don't know, mentorship as we're entering young adulthood. And I think like as we started growing and trying to figure out our own dynamics in our family and how that was going to look, that's when things started like getting tense, because we wanted like less input from you, but we didn't know how to work that out yet,
or ask for that space or create that space. Like that was definitely. And you know, for me, I was used to being needed. Felt good to be needed, right? And you're trying to figure out like, what did I do wrong? Like, what is happening? Like, oh, like there was initial feelings of like feeling shut out or closed out, or like, oh, like
you felt us pulling back. And
and it was like, well, what am I doing wrong? I'm just doing what I've always done. So what's happened here? And I think we just weren't aware. And it felt like once you guys started doing some work on your relationship specifically, and Jason was able to say like, hey mom, like I realized like I need to be going to Kylie first, and like that's where it needs to start. Like we need to form that team ourselves. And you know, like I don't need you to be on the team with us anymore. We've got our own team now. You can be the visiting team or whatever. And so you know, that was hard, but at the same time I was happy that they got that clarity. And we're saying like, you're not, there's nothing wrong. We're not trying to pull away and not have a relationship with you. We are just going to make sure we have our conversations and work through things together first, and then we might talk to you, or we might not, but like that we're going to keep it here first. And I was aware enough that I know that that's the healthier version of a marriage. And so I do think you guys being together young kind of started us up, but it was also my first time being a mother-in-law, right? So, you know, it is what it is. And I think the good news is that all of us were willing to have those uncomfortable conversations. And
I think it took us a while to get comfortable being uncomfortable and sitting down to do that, for sure. And part of it just being that we didn't know like the right vocabulary or have any of those tools to have those conversations too.
Yeah.
And all of us have developed that like personally because we've been each working on our own stuff that we have going on our own.
Yeah.
And I think that really helped us to be able to understand each other better too.
Yeah, that definitely brought a lot more awareness. And there is nothing better than having kids and them having kids. You get to learn all about, you get more reflected back to you as a mother-in-law or as a parent, and so you have all sorts of opportunity to kind of look in the mirror of like how you raised your kids. And so you're watching them to start now raising kids, and they're doing it different. And on more than one occasion Jason has come to me and be like, well, we're not doing that because when I experienced this with you when I was a kid, I didn't like that. That didn't feel good, and we're not doing that. And it was like, I had to figure out how to be compassionate with myself and forgive myself first, and and not be defensive. And at the same time, just be like really open to like looking within. So it has definitely been a catalyst for me having to work on myself to be able to show up in this relationship. I've had to really look in the mirror quite a bit and just grow from it. And I think that as a mother-in-law, it's really important to be open to hearing that feedback, because if our kids are willing to have that conversation, then that means they love us and they want that relationship to be better. And so that was even though it was hard, it also made me feel good that they were trying to work on the relationship, were willing to sit down and have a conversation, even if it didn't feel good, that, because I think there's a lot of people out there that have this relationship dynamic and they don't have those conversations.
And then it just keeps building and building and getting worse. And I feel like that's probably where we've been at one point or another, and we just didn't talk about things and
for
then
too long.
We decided we both didn't like how we were feeling, so that's kind of the point of where everything just, tension has to release somehow, and either just distance. And I feel like people make it really easy to cut other people out of their life. Like that's a coping mechanism and a way that we make ourselves feel safer sometime. And I've definitely done that at certain points, just, when you're trying to process things. But ultimately, like you're saying, if you both can come into it like with a open, tender, like heart that's ready to receive and hear things without judgment, and you're not taking things personally, that's when you can have the space to grow and understand each other.
And I mean, even try not to take things personally, but like if you can come in and be like, okay, what they're saying, even if I don't agree with their perspective 100%, there's some truth in there. So it might be needing to sit back and kind of think on that and then respond again later, because it's not always easy, and it feels very personal when someone's saying it hurts when you do this. It's really hard to not to get personal, right? But I think my hope is that a lot of people out there are, especially if you're watching this, I'm going to assume you're someone who's trying to grow and change who you are, and that's where I'm at. I've always wanted to continue to actively make sure I'm trying to show up as my best self as a mom and mother-in-law, and so it's been worth it to me. It's worth it to be uncomfortable to have the relationship, because that makes space for the joy and the happiness and the fun that we get to have together,
and the trust that you build with one another too.
Oh, that's true. And I definitely feel like every time we've had a hard conversation and come away, like I feel closer to you guys. I'm gonna get choked up. I feel closer, and I feel way more trust, and I feel safer. So then the next conversation feels safer, because
and it's not as hard to have it.
Because then, one of the things that I know I did as a mom was like I was much more reactive in conversations, and so that left that impression on the kids. I was very authoritative in my style, and I did the best that I could with all the things, and but I know that created a dynamic where you guys didn't always feel comfortable approaching me at first. It felt scary. Is that true?
I would agree.
Or like intimidating maybe, or...
And I think part of it, like we've talked about before, is like I'm really not comfortable with hard emotions, like the intensity or like anger or like, oh, just like that. I don't know what exactly you would describe that with. Like that was a lot in my household growing up that I saw in a really unhealthy way, so I always shy away from that intensity and lean more into like the soft emotions of sadness and like I don't know, that's a big one that's easy for me to feel versus the other. And you're more comfortable in the opposite of me, so it's like trying to figure out how to have conversations somewhere in the middle without making each other like too, you know, like like you want to just contract and recoil.
Right. And I'm not wanting to come out
fighting,
ready to fight. And that's my coping. You know, we all have coping. We all have like a main emotion we go to when we're in fear and stress. And mine is anger for sure, because then I get in fighting mode to handle stuff and like protect or fight for whatever. And
I would say I fawn and I go into like people pleasing and just like, what can I do to get out of this situation and make this person feel better, whether I feel good or not?
Whatever happens to bring her emotion level down.
Exactly.
And I am aware that I can, like, just even expressing myself, like, what I feel is fairly normal, even in just my normal conversation, even if it's not a hard conversation, I tend to be I gesture a lot. I'm pretty passionate about, like, how I talk anyways. So just bringing that awareness of like, okay, like I know that I created that when I raised the boys, and so I've worked on that. But at first it made it harder for them to want to have a conversation, because there was this like waiting for me to like get really emotional and upset. So then she's worried about not feeling safe and, you know, emotionally. And so I there was a time where I just was like, I really need to make sure I'm showing that to you. And you know, we got to a point where I had done a lot of self-work, and we had a conversation. I was like, have I ever come at you and like ripped your head off and like screamed in your face or anything? And you were like, no. And I was like, okay, like I've always tried to show up and be safe. And even if I'm having strong feelings, I'm still here. I'm still listening. I'm here, and I might be uncomfortable and emotional, and I might be crying, but I'm here. I love you. Like, I'm hearing it all, and I'm not going to attack you.
And I think that was like, we both, like, you were growing a lot, we are growing a lot, and we're continuing on that path. And so just, you know, being able to accept that you've changed too, I think that was part of it. Not seeing you for the person that you are now, but like just seeing you for how things had been in the past, and having to let go of that, and like give you the benefit of the doubt that that's not gonna, you know, like we're not gonna have that reaction, or you know, that type of thing, letting that go.
And I do think that was a big change, another changing point for us, because I felt like I was being like stuck in a box and being treated like I was the person I was at 30, and I'm nearing 50, and it's like, I'm not that person. Like, I've done all this work, I've gone and learned a lot of tools, like I've learned how to communicate better, and you know, so it came to, I feel like I finally got the words to express that, and I, you know, I could see all the work that they had done on themselves, and so I was trying to show up with them with the acknowledgement of who you guys were as a couple, and the changes you'd made and all the work you've done. And I'm so thankful that you guys continue to actively work on yourselves and work on yourself as a couple. And it's awesome to watch you guys grow. I'm not gonna get choked up again. So I'm super thankful for that. And I can't, I think, encourage enough for people to make that investment and really looking within and doing work to just learn about yourself, and like we definitely have, we all bring wounds, childhood
Yeah.
wounds, right, to the table. So then that affects how we respond, and how I hear what she has to say to me is heard through my childhood wound, which is worthiness. So then I'm like, oh, well, then I'm not worthy, or I'm not good enough, or I'm always failing at being a mother-in-law, or I'm never getting it right. And, you know, you might be hearing it to a completely different wound. So it sounds very different. So I think the inner work isn't just about there's looking at yourself, but there's also like learning about your wounds and your personality, so that you know how you tick. And then when you start to get a good handle on that, and you start spending time healing and doing some of that, feeling your feelings and healing those childhood wounds, and realizing you're not in the same situation you were as a child now, it can help shift the ability to then start looking at everybody else through different eyes, and seeing their changes, and starting to learn their style of communication and what wounds. And like, when I realized you were a processor that needed more time, and that you weren't comfortable with the intensity, like if I hadn't like kind of fixed myself, I don't think I would have had the capacity to like start looking into you guys and go, oh, this is how I need to show up for them, for us to have the best conversation.
Right.
So I think that inner work, and like really learning how we each tick, you know, it's been a way to be able to have those conversations.
And I feel like I had to work on like not shutting down and going inward, and being able to like open up my nervous system to be able to receive, you know, like input and feedback without taking it so personally, or like an attack, and like I was doing something wrong and not living up to, you know, some standard, or that I set on myself. Nobody else was doing it, but that's what it feels like, you know, when you're in that place. And you know, not reverting back to just like avoiding, detaching, because that's what I go into.
Yeah. And was there any specific times where you felt like you were being held to a standard, or needed to meet a standard? Or like, do you feel like, I feel like when you become a mom, like there becomes a time where then all of a sudden it's not just like how you're showing up, but now you're choosing and showing how you are as a mom. And do you feel like that there's a pressure daughter-in-laws feel from their mother-in-laws in any way? Like, did that, because you talked about how the dynamic changed then, so did that shift to like, did it give you other feelings? Or like, is there a way, like as a mother-in-law, we can show up during that time?
I think one thing like that maybe hurt me most during that time was like, I feel like you know, thought I could like take it all on or something, and like I couldn't voice when things were hard, you know what I'm saying? Like I was just expected to like do all this stuff because like you were able to do it and get through it, that I should just be able to do it and get through it, and I shouldn't need like extra support like in this area or this area. And I think that's like what hurt me sometimes more, like but I'm like having such a hard time inside. And with Silas, the first time, like I was having all this, you know, like postpartum anxiety, and didn't know what it was, or even how to talk about it, or that like the stuff that I was going through wasn't like normal, quote unquote, and that it was something that I should, you know, seek support and help for. So I have all this internal stuff going on, but didn't know like how to ask for support or talk about how hard it was without feeling like shut down around it, if that makes sense. So I think that was a hard time, and just trying to like figure out who you are, what your new needs are, and
as a young mom, new mom.
And I honestly don't hear a lot of people talking about how long it takes to like feel like yourself again. And for me personally, like with both kids, it's right around like 2.5 that I finally just feel like I'm like walking out of this cloud, and I'm feeling like more vibrant and alive again. Yeah.
I think that that awareness, and I think that talking about that, because you know, watching you go through it, and then my other daughter-in-law going through it, like, you know, I think it's watching you kind of go through that and realizing what you really needed,
Yeah.
like I feel like it's helping me try to convey like that first year is hard for every new parent, no matter how much support, no matter how perfect your life is, no matter if you're like a million, just like it doesn't matter how perfect your life is pre-kid, like that first year there's just so much adjustment. Your body's changed, you have hormones, you're not getting to sleep, like it now changes your relationship dynamic, and all of a sudden now you and your partner have this other body to consider and keep alive, and there's just so much that you're taking on in that first year, and just like trying to really express like this is hard, and it's normal to feel like this is too hard some days, it sucks some days, but it doesn't mean you are failing or there's anything wrong with you. This is a normal struggle for all. It was hard for all of us. I think it made me realize like I needed to tap in and convey like that this phase was hard for me too. Like, and I had good hold please. I feel like I had good a lot of support around me, but I think I'm glad to hear that there's more of awareness talking about like the mental health aspect of it now, because then you can start to share that with your friends, and then they're like, oh, it's okay for me to ask for help, and that it doesn't make me a bad mom, or like I'm not good enough mom if I need extra support, or because my body's healing from making a baby. So is there anything specific you would suggest for a mother-in-law during that transition for us to show up? What would benefit you as the daughter-in-law the most in that time?
I mean, everybody's so different in what they want during that time period, and I think part of it might too just be to get really clear before you go into your postpartum period with what you do want help and support in, and maybe where you want more space away from people, because sometimes you do feel like just cocooning away and not having a lot of like outside input from other people or just like the world during that time. And I think I didn't know how to think about that beforehand. What do I actually need to feel supported and loved? So, I mean, for me, just having not to worry about meals, getting up and cooking, or like sweeping the floor, like household tasks, so I could just focus on baby, because that's what I'm always usually like, my mind's just going so fast. So having that kind of support is really helpful for the first baby. And then when you get into having more kids come along, just like out childcare, or taking the other sibling away, and just having one-on-one time newborn,
the next one.
Or even like time to go get a shower and have an hour in your bedroom by yourself, like those kind of moments I think are most supportive in like the early phases of postpartum.
Okay,
for sure.
Good. Okay, hopefully these are good tips that are helping new mamas out there to know how to go, oh, I should have this conversation maybe even in advance, and even if it's afterwards, it might be worth talking about, sitting down before with your partner and being like, okay, I think it would be nice to have some meals and this and that, and then you guys approaching your parents or in-laws and being like, okay, this is what we think would be really helpful during that time.
Whoever your team is,
whoever you think it's going to be, just saying that. And then if you get into that part where you are postpartum and you're like, oh, I'm struggling, just know that it's okay to need help or extra support in that time, because all of our bodies are as unique as our birth experience. And they're going to react differently. And so as a mother-in-law, I think not viewing it through, well, I did this, or this is how I experienced it, what's your problem? Kind of a thing, not having that, but just remembering I don't have your body, so I don't have that experience, right? And to try to not be in any sort of judgment as much as just seeking how can you support them best so that they thrive as a parent with your new grandbabies. So
I think even me and my mom have had those conversations too, where I've felt like she said, well, I did all of this when you guys were kids. I'm like, okay, that's great, but I'm having a hard time right now. I just need you to be there for me. Like, I'm not trying to compare, like what your struggle was, if it was harder than my struggle. Like, I just
that doesn't help.
Right. It's just like, I just need maybe to be heard or listen, like not even outside support. Maybe it's just to like vent and get it out even.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's natural for all of us to kind of do that comparison stuff.
Yeah, because that's how we kind of relate to each other sometimes too.
Yeah. Well, I'm super glad that we've always been able to eventually figure it out. But I think, like you talked about, like it's also sometimes hard to even know what you need.
Right.
You don't even have the ability to put into words sometimes. So it can be hard to ask for help if you're like, I don't know, I'm just in a hole and I can't think straight and
you're like
I don't know what I need.
State and you can't.
Yeah. So in that case, it might be just that we step in and take the child, or you know, for an afternoon or something, so you can just kind of maybe decompress. Well, I hope that little tangent on the baby phase when they're new parents could be helpful to you as well. And is there any other perspective that you wish mother-in-laws or knew? Like, I know here, I'll give an example. Jason, when we were out as a huge fan, like all the family, and we were out, and I had asked a question about Silas, and you didn't seem to really notice it, but she was with her other child, and so we were out by the water, but my son perceived that as me questioning whether Kylie had, was doing her mothering, like why are you asking,
like my parenting
skills? Or something. And so he was feeling protective and frustrated that I had said that. And so one of the things he and I talked about is like how important it is that I wait for the invitation, or that I wait to be asked. Like, if you were feeling like you needed help keeping an eye on Silas where he was, you would have asked, or Jason would have asked, and so it wasn't necessary for me. I was actually asking because I was trying to support and be extra eyes for you guys. But that's an example of where his perspective of what I said was completely different. So in my heart, I was like, oh, I'm just trying to be supportive and be that extra net, and extra set of hands. And he's like, I'll let you know if I need your extra set of hands. You should ask first. And I was like, oh, whoops, I did it again.
And I feel like that's even like such a fine line to navigate, because sometimes I don't want to have to ask for the help. I want someone to just like step in and, oh, they're struggling over there. I think that kind of comes back to your own like wounding and getting triggered in different situations. Yeah. But when like stuff like that does come up, like talking about it, maybe then if you can, so it doesn't build up and fester.
Yeah. And we talked about it. He waited till after, but he did call me like that following week, and we talked about it, and so it was fine. Right. And I was telling him like why I said what I did, and he was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense.
That clears it up. Yeah.
But for me, I think I'm trying to remember as a mom of adults to ask, do you want my input, or do you want me to just listen? Yeah. Or I've told Jason, like, you need, if you call me and you vent, I would love it if you would initiate telling me this is a me venting session. I don't want your solutions, because I was irritating him by offering solutions, but that's like what I did. Like that was my role. So like, I want to give all my advice. Yeah. And so I think that's been a big lesson I'm still working on, is like waiting for that invitation, or that for you guys to ask, or even me being like, do you want me to, asking you, do you want me to, whatever, because then you can be like, no, I got it. So then there's not so I think it's just trying to be more conscious of communication. It is. It's so much communication. And like, I could have gotten all hurt by Jason saying that, but it was like, oh, okay, like there's just another adjustment I need to make.
Yeah.
And, you know, the other thing that I would say to daughter-in-laws, if there's multiple kids that have multiple families, like each one is different. So now I have to learn the dynamics and rules and boundaries that couple
family,
want, and how they parent and how they're doing their thing different. And then we have, it just keeps going. So we're, as this generation or this role, we're having to really like navigate a lot of the dynamics and trying to make sure we're not stepping on toes and stuff, but we're still there ready. Like, how do you stay like ready but not like insert yourself where you're not needed or wanted? And it is
that's where I think like giving people grace or the benefit of the doubt is really important. And like at first I like before we've had all these talks and opened the door to like feel safe with one another, I don't think I know what I wasn't always giving you like the benefit of the doubt in this situation, and you might have felt that way about me. And so I think that really shifts how you interact with people too, when you can shift that like thought patterning or mindset about that kind of thing, and not treat people like who they were in their past, letting their past go. I think that's a really big point to remember. It's
the only way we're going to get through this, because it's hard. I mean, just life is hard, and if we can't make this the safe space and be there for each other, then it makes life really lonely and frustrating. It's hard to come together and have joy and fun and play when there's all this other stuff unsaid,
and I would have to say, like, we haven't had this modeled to us from anybody like in older generations or anything. And I've thought about that before too. Like, we're figuring all of this stuff out for the first time and new, and we're both the oldest for each of our families, and so that's a different thing.
I know.
Like, you guys kids.
You guys get to break the ice. I'm sure lots of firstborns can relate to that.
Which isn't always the most fun, but I mean, like, it's worth it, like we're talking about, and knowing that it might make it easier for like our younger siblings or for our own kids, so that they can see what it looks like to have a healthy dynamic and relationship, and how you have problem resolution and all of that.
Yes, because I don't feel like it in past generations it was more behind closed doors, or it wasn't happening at all. And I think as each generation comes, we're talking more and trying to take care of our emotional and mental health. And so I do think that that's becoming more the norm. But like you said, like, I feel like this generation is making a lot of headway and a lot of change. And so my hope is that eventually, like, that whole in-law, like, the dreaded mother-in-law, I want that to go away. Like, my hope is that, that won't be the norm anymore, like, because it doesn't have to be for everybody. And I know we can't, if you have a in-law on the other side that's not communicating, all you can really do is work on yourself and how you show up, and heal from whatever wounds you can, so that when they show up and they're unhealed and wounded and they're not nice and they're unkind, you can try to see them through compassionate eyes of like they're speaking from their pain and wounds that they have not healed. So one of my little things that I do in those situations is I try to picture them at like 5 years old, and they're sad and wounded, and like somebody just really hurt them so bad, and like that's who's speaking to me. So when you can try to see a person who's refusing to work on this, like if you can see them with that, it does shift. And even if you aren't having a conversation, you shifting your energy and seeing them through those eyes, I've seen the other person shift and change without
like
any talking.
I've done
happen.
That with stuff that's come up with us. So like, okay, this is little Erica. I can understand her. It really does make a big difference in how you're like responding or showing up versus reacting yourself also from your wounding, and then you're both coming at each other from wounding, and you're not getting anywhere.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I can just think of, I can think of a couple examples right now that I'm not going to share where, I just was like, oh, okay, I see where they're coming from. And it just took the pain from me.
Yeah, like the feeling of a personal attack.
Yeah, and was like, oh, this is their wounded version of themselves is driving the bus right now, as I like to say. The 5-year-old's in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And I think that's been part of it, is me doing my personal growth and trying to really work on myself and get tools, because I realized that I was letting 5-year-old Erica drive the bus a lot. And so now it's like I'm aware that she's asking to get in the seat. Like I've gotten to the one who's like, I can feel her being like, I want to turn. It's like, no. Like, and that's a definite sign for me that I have to take some time alone to really feel my feelings and see why I'm getting so triggered, or whatever, why I'm having such a hard time
taking ownership.
And just see why this hurts so bad. Their other person's behaviors, why is it causing the whole body, my whole body to flare up and get that like alarm bells going, and then my fighter comes out. Erica's ready to fight. Little Erica's ready to go to battle. So those have definitely been clues I've tried to develop or pay attention to, so that I try to stop myself from saying the thing. But so I think we've dove into like sharing a lot about perspective in hopes that this is helpful for you. And if you are somebody who struggles with that and you would like to dive into it even more, you can certainly reach out through the show notes. I have contact information there if you're wanting some mentorship in that. And we also have other events coming up that I think also help us in that it's important to include play. And we're going to actually do part 2 next, and that is going to be diving into what we feel are some of the key tips and tricks that we have that we utilize to keep our relationship growing and as healthy as it can be. So I just want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Kylie, for coming and being willing to share.
Of course.
Okay, so we'll see you for part 2. Just one more note I wanted to add to this episode is that if you are somebody who has situations where you're like, yeah, I wish I had someone to bounce off ideas of like how to address X, Y, or Z with my in-law, I want you to either message us directly, put it in the comments, or you could reach out if you actually wanted to run a situation by it and get the other side's perspective from daughter-in-law or mother-in-law, like just that other side. We just wanted to offer that out there. We'd be super curious to see what issues people have that come up that they might want some different perspective. And so we just wanted to throw that out there. So definitely reach out, check in the show notes for how to reach out to us if you have a question. So this is your opportunity to like ask your in-law without asking your in-law, right? Like, when do you get the chance to do that? Kind of get the other person's thinking to try to grasp where they're coming from so you're not frustrated. So I just want to invite you to take advantage of that. If you are someone who has stuff going on that you're like, I could use somebody's perspective on this. So check it out in the show notes.